Hello, I want to continue with my analysis of the first paragraph of Deleuze and Guattari's What is Philosophy? So, uh, in order to go forward, I have to look backward a little and see what came up in the preceding video in slightly more systematic or more formal or formalized terms. So, one way of getting to that is by looking at the questions. Why did Deleuze and Guattari write this book? Why do they use as the title What is Philosophy? And why do they start off with talking about old age and assimilating the question, what is philosophy, when they ask it, to the question of what is it that I've been doing all my life. None of these things go without saying, and in fact, we should be used to the fact by now that when Deleuze and Guattari separately or together write a book, it's in relation to a particular conjuncture. So the introduction to this book is basically, in sort of fairly abstract terms, an analysis of the conjuncture, and within the conjuncture, what are the sort of key points where power is gaining more and more influence over our thoughts and actions. So first, there's the idea of the question. We begin with a question on the cover and on the title page, when one of their themes is, in fact, that we're losing today, due to political forces and the economic forces of the market, we're losing the sense of what it is to ask a question, what a question is. From their point of view, a question is only a real question when you've taken the trouble to construct a plane of immanence with its infinite movements, a set of concepts with their interrelations, and conceptual personae and their places and times and landscapes and trays. So nowadays people think they can just ask questions in any way, and hopefully that will mean something to the person that they're posing the question to, so they don't have to motivate within the terms of that person or within the terms of a relation that has been constructed over time with that person. They can just go around asking questions and expecting answers. So the idea of beginning with a question is to foreground the questions are the sort of last thing that come up in any thoughtful endeavour. You sort of around in a sort of confusing but not totally chaotic mess, because there's always this notion of chaos and cosmos, chaosmos, in Deleuze and Guattari's work. And sometimes, maybe, I don't want to do an absolute rule, questions could be there at the beginning, but in fact, it's the whole process of working through the shining points in that confusion, that you'll construct a question worthy of the name. Secondly, and it's sort of tied, why do they begin with old age? Deleuze and especially, but Deleuze and Guattari, they're thoroughly in the optic of the death of the author, even though that sounds a bit macabre when they're writing this book at the end of their lives. But that makes this notion of basically of being towards death, which is present in this work, more to the fore. So old age is once again in this sort of political and economic context, a stake in the politico-economic game, if you could call it a game, because the stakes are quite serious. So the ideal of marketing is segmenting the population and having sort of different target markets. So old age and seniors and all that stuff become a new marketing target, just as they manage to isolate out different sectors or segments of the different young ages to be able to create products and types of consumption that go with that. So this is what we see towards the end of the introduction, where they talk about philosophy is an old person. So when we're talking about old age in the introduction, it's not just people. It can be attributed to other types of conceptual persona, including philosophy. So on the second to last page in the French of the introduction, philosophy is called an old person and is contrasted with the young executives that turn any concept into a merchandise. So questions are not merchandises to be exchanged with answers in some sort of economic marketplace of ideas and of information. So philosophy is confronting these young executives, and that's the thing. Youth, not as an intensive phenomenon, but youth as a market concept that is placed as a sort of overarching ideal. Elderly people now are meant to be good consumers and have a sort of second stage of youth, which we'll see in the first paragraph of the introduction, where they're refusing the idea of an eternal youth. So this is yet another stake, and both of these stakes of what I've called deconcepting or conceptualizing the population, which makes them unaware of what it is to ask a question, what is involved in it, what a real question is, and it puts up this ideal of age brackets for the market and the supra ideal of youth as the model towards which the other age brackets must converge as much as possible. that's part of the explanation of why this book takes the particular form it does. I also said that the idea of old age in the philosophical sense that they're using is not exactly the replacement concept, but the successor concept to the schizo of earlier works and the nomad. Well, the schizo is in both Anti-Oedipus and Capitalism and Schizophrenia as a project, so in 1,000 Plateaus as well. Although the nomad is more foregrounded there. I just like to refer forward to page 70, near the bottom of the page, where they've been talking about the difference between concepts and psychosocial categories. So they're talking about old age, not as a psychosocial, and I would add economic and political category, but as a concept. And the parallel I want to make is with the discussion of schizophrenia. So this is a really condensed back reference to Anti-Oedipus. Philosophy and schizophrenia have often been associated with each other, but in one case, the schizophrenic is a conceptual persona who lives intensely within the thinker and forces him to think, whereas in the other, the schizophrenic is a psychosocial type who represses the living being and robs him of his thought. Sometimes the two are combined, clasped together, as if an event that is too intense corresponds to a lived condition that is too hard to bear. So we have the schizo as the breakthrough and the schizophrenic as the breakdown, and the schizo is that which enables thought and more intense life, and the schizophrenic is that which, it's a sort of mold that is imposed on people and becomes true for them, unfortunately, that represses life and robs the schizophrenic of their thought. So this is the same thing that we see in old age. Old age is being put forward as a concept, as something that can emerge in any psychosocial stage of life and bring a more mature perspective, because it's more thinking and less obeying. So this is why I said young people can be older in that sense than their teachers. Not all the time, it's not a universal rule either, but just to relativize the relation between the concept and its psychosocial and chronological and generational instantiations. The idea that the two are clasped together, the concept and the psychosocial type, combined together, where you have an event that is too intense, that corresponds to a lived condition that is too hard to bear. The English sort of gets the French the other way around, where they say the lived condition corresponds to the event, and we have a high, over-intense event that, when it's instantiated, can result in a lived condition that's too hard to bear, and we can see how this applies to old age as well. A third thing that I dealt with that I want to sort of formalize a little more is why this particular reformulation of the question, what is philosophy, when they say, what is it that I have been doing all my life? And to unpack that question and why I might find it, or we might find it problematic, might be interesting to look at Badiou's theory of the four truth procedures, where we have science and art, as in what is philosophy. We have politics, which in Badiou's seminar, he claims that it's a big problem that politics is not included in what is philosophy. We've got philosophy and science and art. In his terms, he doesn't really want to put them on the same plane. Deleuze and Guattari put them on the same plane. But it's still a problem, whichever way you look at it, as flat or slightly uneven plane. And so we don't see politics there. One could reply that all of Anti-Oedipus and A Thousand Plateaus is full of political analysis, and then politics is present all over the place in what is philosophy. This is true, but we could say that philosophy and art and science are all over the place in all these books, yet they saw fit to crystallize out from this gaseous form of these practices or procedures to individual chapters, treating them in terms of the demarcations between them. So maybe they did owe us a chapter on politics, but they didn't want to for some reason, or they couldn't. And another thing that Badiou doesn't go on about, but we could say, if we're looking at his system, is love. So some philosophers, I could take the example of Feyerabend, who's a pluralist like Deleuze and Guattari, who has many points in common, and including the nature of the question that only comes up after much sort of messing around, creating the problematics, and all sorts of other things. Feyerabend decides to end his book, his last book, which is an autobiography, on the preeminence of love. So not necessarily in a wishy-washy sentimental way. In his own way, he sort of tries to create a concept of love. There's no chapter on love here. We could say, yes, Anti-Oedipus is all about desire and desiring machines. And we'll see desiring machines implicitly referenced in this paragraph. But there's no chapter on love or desire if they still want to insist on their silly little French post-Lacanian idea that desire is the key concept and not love and not the psyche, for example. But that seems to lead to the thought not only of why are there, we could think, 2 missing chapters to the book, but why is, instead of love, we end up on old age and philosophy. So what is it that I've been doing all my life? You can say, well, it's normal because they're philosophers, but they're not ordinary philosophers stuck to their CV. That's what they've always tried to argue, that they're into something else. So for me, that remains, if not exactly a puzzle, an intriguing point. A third, I'm not counting, so maybe it's a third or a fourth point. Another point is that they say that the bibliography is very limited. So that's a little strange when, in fact, not only do what they consider to be sort of ordinary academic philosophers write books or articles or chapters about what is philosophy all the time, but there are two philosophers. Usually they don't like to pick on people their own size. So they try it a little here, and they don't do a good job of talking about Badiou and Laruelle, although they make interesting points. But these two philosophers they actually talk about in the book wrote about what is philosophy. So Badiou in 1989 published a manifesto for philosophy. They quoted in what is philosophy. Laruelle published Philosophy and Non-Philosophy, I think it's the year before, and they mention this book in What is Philosophy. So the library is not as limited as they claim. So I think that's all I wanted to say to come up to date with what I did last time. The other thing is not developed until later, but it's the question of what are all these terms. We've got old age, and I keep saying they're trying to give a concept of old age, but their idea is that there are three components to philosophy and to philosophy's activity of constructing a problematic in which a question can be really posed. They are the plane, the concepts, and the conceptual characters that also include the landscapes and conditions and so on. And a term, any term, including old age, is going to be used in relation to all three components: plane, concept, character or persona, and will have different but overlapping senses in all three cases. So that's something to keep in mind as well. And that is why, according to them, they say this later in the book, that they have to proceed by paradoxes. So this is spelt out a little more on in a chapter on conceptual personae. And on page 80, they say, if philosophy is paradoxical by nature, it's because it uses sentences of a standard language to express something that does not belong to the order of opinion or even of the proposition. So it's creating concepts and problematics. The concept is a solution only if the conditions of the philosophical problem are found on the plane of immanence. The unknowns of the problem are found in the conceptual personae. And philosophy is paradox because the criteria for each philosophical activity, that is, laying out the plane, creating the concepts, inventing the personae. So the criteria for each of these three philosophical activities are found only in the other two, which is why philosophy develops in paradox. So they can't say everything at the beginning all at once, but that's why they're proceeding by way of a paradoxical logic and a paradoxical order of development and a paradoxical use of terms. So I'm going to continue with the first paragraph from where we left off last time with the question, but what is it, or what was it that I did all my life, or what is it that I have done all my life? There are cases where old age gives not an eternal youth. We talked about that eternal youth is more a marketing idea or some sort of mythological cult idea. There are cases where old age gives not an eternal youth, but on the contrary, a sovereign liberty. So this sovereign liberty I'm putting in relation to the perhaps of the first word of the first paragraph, where I said we were in a domain of uncertainty and non-mastery, and in relation to the way of posing the question when we were young, where we asked the question in a too abstract way, where we dominated it in passing. So there's the idea, once again, of mastering the question, mastering the discipline, being in a entitled institutional position of mastery to be able to deal with things that way, or at least projecting, if one isn't really employed as a philosopher, projecting oneself into that sort of role. So here, old age is a conceptual place where one can have a sovereign liberty. It's a case of pure necessity where one enjoys a moment of grace between life and death. So we said that old age, yes, it's true, it's a concept and not necessarily the sociological category that we know and fear. And it's nonetheless that as well. So there's this notion of an urgency in the being towards death, which is also for them a being towards life, a more intense life. So it's a moment of grace between life and death. So it's in the between, which is the zone of intensity that sort of makes the two different sides grapple together, which is why being towards death and being towards life are in sort of constant cross-becoming for Deleuze and Guattari. And that's the place or the moment of grace where all the pieces of the machine combine to send into the future an arrow which crosses the ages. So I just want to say that with the translation, there's a problem here. There are times when old age produces not eternal youth, but a sovereign freedom, a pure necessity in which one enjoys a moment of grace. So we can think enjoyment, surplus enjoyment there as well. And in which all the parts of the machine come together to send into the future a feature that cuts across all ages. So they call the word trait in French a feature. That sort of makes sense. And trait in French does have that meaning of trait or feature, but it also has the meaning of a projectile, and like an arrow, a stone or an arrow. And that's the sense there, because that's an indirect reference to a quote from Nietzsche's untimely meditations that Deleuze always likes to cite about being untimely is, well, it's being conceptual, as we've been trying to establish, and being untimely is being able to seize an arrow that has been sent to us from the past, an arrow of inspiration, of intensity, and he doesn't really say it because it makes a really complicated metaphor, transforming the arrow in some way, and or replacing it with your own arrow that you fire forward into an unknown future. So calling it a trait is calling it a, whatever they say, a feature, misses the resonance with other uses of this citation, whether fully explicit or implicit like here, and the relation with the call out to Nietzsche. I just want to comment on the word machine, which I sort of foreshadowed. We see progressively in the evolution of Deleuze and Guattari's capitalism and schizophrenia project. I propose that we still call it that even for this book, where desiring machine, which was all over the place in Anti-Oedipus, becomes downplayed, and the notion of machinic assemblage, or the notion of assemblage, which is both machinic and enunciative, takes the place. And here it's an even more purified form. And unfortunately, I find when people talk about desiring machines, they automatically think of sex. So and there's the sort of post-Freudian aspect to it. So you think desiring machines, there's something sexual in the ordinary sense in it. But in fact, desiring machines from the very beginning are just as much, if not more so, noetic. So here, the machine, I will call it a desiring machine, the machine is looked at from its angle of creative machine. So usually, and here is, I consider that a Hegelian or a Jungian aspect to their ideas. Usually we're thinking in Deleuze and Guattari that the totality is bad, unity is bad, even synthesis, unless it's the right sort of immanent syntheses that we find in Anti-Oedipus, synthesis is bad, and so on. But there we've got all of the pieces of the machine coming together to send a projectile into the future. So this is the idea of, and this is why old age, in their sense, can come at other moments in life than the old age of the socio-economic category. It's when everything comes together, and you, even more so than in other creative phases, and you can send something intense and powerful into the future. So I sort of hesitated on how to call this notion of old age, which isn't really the old age of the late 70s and 80s and 90s. They want to distinguish it from the age of maturity, but one could say that maturation keeps on going. So maybe, following Shakespeare, we could call it ripeness. We do talk about a ripe old age, and there's the Shakespearean quote, ripeness is all. So in this phase or moment of ripeness, things can be brought together and produce something that can be sent into the future. So this bringing together all the pieces of the machine, that's another way of stating what we've been saying all along. The machine, the philosophical machine, or the creative machine, although we'll have to look at that more closely, are bringing together. Well, when you're talking about philosophy, you say the plane, the concept, and the conceptual personae. I'm proposing to sort of slightly abstract out and talk about the universe or the world of the philosopher, but also of the novelist and the filmmaker. The universe, the thoughts or the concepts, if you want, but they don't have to take rigorous conceptual form, and the figuration, which can be more than just conceptual personae and be other types of figuration as well. So in that sense, we're able to refer in a sort of more synthetic way to the different sorts of practice, which is what they're going to do here, because the examples they give of this moment of grace between life and death, where all the pieces of the machine come together and send a projectile into the future, the examples they give are first painting, Le Titien, Turner, Monet; literature with Chateaubriand, Life of Rancé; and the cinema, well, they use Evans and the wind of the Unchained Wind. I'm going to go more detail what they extract out of these examples, and the fourth example is Kant for the Critique of Judgment. And in each case, we're getting a freeing oneself from the limits. So once again, this domain of non-mastery that we saw from the beginning with the perhaps and with the critique of those who dominate the question instead of being seized by the question. So we can see here that although they're preparing the rest of the book, we have three examples from art and literature, and we have a fourth example from philosophy. So what is missing is, given that they have chapters of philosophy, art and science, what is missing is a scientific example of this work of old age that brings all the pieces together and sends a projectile into the future. Badiou would have no problem. He could easily put Cantor in there. Maybe Deleuze and Guattari could have put Dedekind, Riemann, Grothendieck. They could have made an effort for mathematics, and for science they could have chosen somebody from quantum physics like Niels Bohr, or from biology. But there's a gap there, which is a little strange. Perhaps the gap is because there's something wrong with their analysis of science, as far as I'm concerned. They're not analysing things on the same plane or in the same way. They say that philosophy is non-propositional and science is propositional. So philosophy has concepts and science doesn't have concepts, which sounds wonky. And so science is assigned to functions. And I think the problem, at least in a large part of their analysis, is that they've gone to a lot of trouble to create the notion of philosophy as a process, philosophy in the making. So you could argue that it's not really propositional, it's problematizations in this rich sense of problematization that involves planes or universes and figurations of various sorts. And they're comparing that with, so philosophy in the making, with science as made, science as a result. When science is also science in the making, research, all sorts of interactions and cross-becomings and dialogues and trials and errors and all sorts of creative uses of concept and thought experiment that don't all find their way into the final result. So they're not, and the same for art, they're more into the artist in process. So that may be why the science is missing here. So comparing philosophy in process and science as result is an unfair comparison, and it biases their treatment of science. So what do we get from the artistic examples? From painting, we have the old Turner has acquired or conquered the right to lead painting on a desert path with no return. There's a slight difference in my translation. They say Turner acquired or won the right to take painting down a deserted path. I would say desert path, because desert is something that comes up all over the place in Deleuze and Guattari, and Deleuze particularly likes to quote from Nietzsche, the desert grows. And we said that Deleuze is not this sort of superabundant theorist that some people, or jungle theorist that some people like to claim, and he's not one of impoverishment, and so Deleuze and Guattari share this, but it's a path of sobriety. But that means being freed from all the ordinary and normalized significations, and in some sense deliberately plunging oneself into a creative desert, whatever way that can manifest itself and will leave its traces on the works created by that process. So a desert path of no return that is indistinguishable from a last question. So once again, the desert path is this sobriety, is this non-mastery, and this uncertainty, this will to perhaps, this will to being between as well. Perhaps the life of Rancé marks both the old age of Chateaubriand and the beginning of modern literature. And there's a note to a quote where Rancé is a book about old age as an impossible value. So it's not a psychosocial value, it's an impossible value, it's on a different plane. So that's already becoming philosophy in Chateaubriand's text. So, and it's also a book written about old age in power. So, old age in power is the gerontocracy, something that still continues. Youth, eternal youth, is put up as a consumer ideal, but politically and economically, it's mainly the old people in a non-conceptually reworked sense of old. The gerontocracy that holds the reins of power and money. And some of these people can be officially young, but they're old before their time in many cases, because they've gone totally over to the economic and to manipulating and getting the best out of the economic and political striated universe that we live in today. So, the old age of Chateaubriand and of Deleuze and Guattari in the first sentence has nothing to do with this market youth and with this political and economic gerontocratic regime. Third example, the cinema also offers us sometimes the gifts of the third age. Here they're talking about the third age. So what are the three ages? So we're maybe childhood, which you see Deleuze analyze in Logic of Sense with Lewis Carroll's Alice books, and it comes up as the blocks of childhood in Thousand Plateaus. So childhood, youth, where the danger is the young, rapacious executive, the know-it-all, or the bright young man or bright young woman, a little less often in sexist society, but still the bright, young, up-and-coming, arrogant know-it-all that we have all met and fear to meet again. And but there are no doubt, and probably in their theory of minorities, they give a more positive depiction of youth as a concept and an intensive state, as opposed to the marketized state of youth that we are familiar with today. I just want to compare the translation there because I circled gifts. It's the same. Cinema 2 sometimes offers us its gifts of the third age. So the third age is what I'm calling, the second age is youth going on to maturity, and the third age is ripeness, or we can say maturity going on to ripeness, and there will be a fourth age that unfortunately Deleuze and Guattari never got to in the chronological sense, but they're sort of invoking here. So they're in fact between. This book is a between book, even in that sense, between the third and the fourth age. And the people that they're quoting may be, between, must be in a between state in terms of age. The cinema offers us sometimes the gifts of the third age, where Evans, for example, mixes together his own laugh with the laugh of the sorcerer, it's feminine, so the sorceress or the witch, in the Unchained Wind. So we had the desert path, and here, pushing that further, this notion of non-mastery, we have the Unchained Wind. In the translation, they say the howling wind. So it's true, when the wind is unchained, it's howling, why not? But the idea is it's déchaîné, unchained, and uncontrolled, and blowing away. I guess it's noisy, howling, but it's more than howling. It's sort of sweeping away things and pushing things down or in all directions. So it's a shame to translate. I mean, it's nice. I'm not criticizing the translation in any way. I'm looking at other conceptual resonances and semantic resonances that are the base for them in the text. So they did leave out a bit, as I remarked in the first video. I suppose that's naughty, but I'm not criticizing anyone here. I'm just saying that something that I'd like to emphasize is, from a conceptual point of view, is missed out on here. So the Unchained Wind, and the Unchained comes up again with Kant. So they talk about the Unchained Wind, translated as the howling wind, and for Kant, they talk about an unchained work, the Critique of Judgment, and in the translation they say unrestrained work. So if you're really poetic, you can you don't need the French. You can say howling, unrestrained. I see a connection, but it's not an obvious connection to, in the domain of hyper intensity. So that much can be seen without the crutch of the French. But it's a pity to miss out on this link. Because we're getting the links between the examples and between the beginning of the text. So in the fourth example, in the same way, in philosophy, the Kant's Critique of Judgment is a work of old age, which they just called the third age for Evans, a work of old age, an unchained work. So it's unchained. I could also say unbound. It's the Prometheus unbound as opposed to Prometheus bound. It's not just unchained, it's unbound, and so it can surge forth. So the Critique of Judgment is a work of old age, of an unchained work, behind which its descendants will not cease to run. So it's a projectile, in fact. It's unchained and it can shoot forth like a projectile, and we who come after are in fact behind it. It's far ahead of us, and we're running after it. So that's the untimeliness of the unchained, of the unrestrained, of the howling, of the laugh, of the desert. Kant's Critique of Judgment is an unrestrained work of old age, which his successors have still not caught up with. Okay, but it's a little more of an image when they say ceaselessly running after, but it's the same. If they're running after, they haven't caught up with it. That's okay, but it weakens the imagistic aspect a little. All the faculties of the spirit go beyond their limits. These same limits that Kant had so carefully fixed in the books of his maturity. So there was a young Kant. There was so maybe they're not even including children in their 3 ages. There was the young Kant before he became Kant. There was the Kant of maturity, who wrote the Critique of Pure Reason and the Practical Reason and whatever other demarcationist works he may have set forward. And then there's the old Kant, or the Kant of ripe old age or ripeness. Here they say all the mind's faculties overcome their limits. Overcome, franchise, it's going beyond. So overcoming, why not? But once again, we're losing this image of 1, hyper-intensity, and 2, like Unchained. It's a going beyond. And it's not just overcoming, sort of like a domination. It's an emancipation. Overcome their limits, the very limits that Kant had so carefully laid down in the works of his prime, in the works of his maturity, the works of his prime. Okay, so maturity is the same as the prime age, being in one's prime, and so the next step is, as I keep on saying, is ripeness. So we're seeing this unchaining, this desert, howling wind, is both an emancipation and a projecting. It's sending forth a projectile. So it's this untimeliness that is the crucial time of the concept, and everything that can be seen from a conceptual point of view. So much for the examples. And just to spoil the next paragraph, they continue after having gone through all that. I mean, it is an unchained form of writing in a sense. And then suddenly they turn it down. We cannot pretend to such a status. We cannot claim such a status. Okay. Simply, the time has come, or they say, l'heure, the hour has come. Usually, or often translated as time, but heure is time and hour. The hour has come, given they're going to talk about the figuration aspect of landscape, time and place and circumstances. Both senses are relevant. Simply, the hour has come for us to ask, what is philosophy? We cannot claim such a status. Simply, the time has come for us to ask what philosophy is. And they drop the "and" in the translation. And there's a sort of emphaticness of the "and." And also there's the paratactic aspect. Deleuze and Guattari claim that before being E-S-T-A is, there was, or there is, and T, pronounced A, the same way. So I would keep the A. And we have not ceased to do it, that is to ask the question, what is philosophy, precedingly, and we already had the answer, which has not varied. Philosophy is the art of forming, inventing, of fabricating concepts. What do they say? We had never, yes, that's better. Nous avions. We had never stopped asking this question previously, and we already had the answer, which has not changed. Philosophy is the art of forming, inventing, and fabricating concepts. Which, that's what everybody retains. Philosophy is the creation of concepts. But in fact, it's not true. Philosophy is the creation of concepts and their relations, their articulations, and so on, and also the creation of the plane or of the universe, if you want to talk like me, and of the conceptual personae, and all that goes, all the theatrical settings or cinematic settings that go with that, which I call the figuration. And I think I want to conclude on a point that is topical for the moment and may go away, but it will probably come back again, because it's always cropping up, this idea that Deleuze and Guattari are irrationalists, and the argument for that is totally crazy in the bad sense. I would say ignorant and illiterate as well, and proceeding by absolutely fallacious arguments. There's some guy who's been quoted on Twitter and has written an article, and probably he's going to write a book. I forget his name. It's not important, because there've always been this sort of critique, and it goes away, then comes back again periodically. And the arguments are quite silly. One argument is that Deleuze and Guattari are influenced by Bergson. So there you are, they're influenced by Bergson, so they're irrationalists. And when they really want to make an effort, they say, well, Bergson is based on intuition. So that's irrational, isn't it? So all that I've been saying in these last two videos has been a presentation of the method of intuition in Deleuze and Guattari's work. So Deleuze wrote a book, Bergsonism, before all this, where he devotes a whole chapter to intuition as method. And what is this method? This method is what I've been saying all along, and he develops that in difference and repetition. This method is that of problematization, in the sense of creating the problematic, which means creating the plane on which you are asking your questions and developing your concepts and proposing your solutions or your answers. Laying out the plane, that's a lot of work. Creating the concepts and creating the conceptual personae that go with those concepts in that plane, and all that at the same time, which, because you can't separate them out as separate moments. So all that is intensely, and I would say demandingly, rational work. And people who don't do that work, You see them when they talk about Deleuze, because they haven't done any work, any real work on Deleuze. They've got no idea of the plane. They've got no idea of what the concepts are. They seize on terms, like the term of intuition, and they can't relate it to a concept or to a plane, or even to the actual conceptual personae that embody the plane. They might say Bergson, which is their equivalent of a low-grade conceptual personae that they've got in their head. But the whole problem, don't want to go on about other examples, and occasionally there's a little quote that's thrown out. But we have to keep in mind, if we're going to seize and comprehend anything about Deleuze and Guattari's work, this idea that the question and the answer by itself are trivial. They don't mean anything much unless they're contextualized, if you want, animated by the problematic in which they can occur as real questions and real answers. And that problematic is a rich problematic. It's not just concepts and their relations, but a plane or a universe in which they can be created, and the figures and figurations that give any sort of sense of how that could have any relevance or pertinence to the empirical world. So this is why I've taken so much time to trace the presence of that method in this first paragraph, because without it, you're blind. And then you can say, oh, that's groovy, I like that. Or like, is it, what's his name? Is it Rockwell or something like that? Oh, that's crazy. That's irrational, when his own thinking is so impoverished that he can't even see what is going on, still less have any real motivation for agreeing with it or disagreeing with it. So that's enough for today.